My daughter-in-law told me I was too fat to deserve a piece of cake at my own grandson's birthday, but she forgot I was the one who bought the table it was sitting on. My son didn't stand up for me. He just adjusted his silk tie and chuckled while they secretly plotted to declare me senile and strip mine my life's work to pay off their gambling debts. If you're listening to this, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are watching from. It helps to know I'm not the only one who has seen a family foundation rot from the inside out. They thought the old contractor was just a worn-out checkbook, a structural defect in their high society facade, but they were about to learn that I don't just build skyscrapers. I know exactly which load-bearing walls to kick out to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. Let me tell you how 45 years of pouring concrete taught me that the prettiest houses are often built on the softest dirt. They say you never really know the structural integrity of a house until the storm hits. As a man who spent 45 years pouring footings and raising skyscrapers, I know that truth better than most. You can admire the eggshell finish on the walls. You can run your fingers over the hand-pressed Italian tile in the foyer. You can stare at the intricate crown molding until your neck aches and your eyes water. But a house is a lie if the ground beneath it is soft, if the foundation is weak, if it was poured by a man looking to save a few bucks, mixed with too much sand and not enough cement. It is nothing more than a pretty pile of rubble waiting for a reason to fall. I looked at my son's house, and all I could see were the hairline fractures in the soul of the place. My name is Arthur. For nearly half a century, I ran the largest construction firm in the tri-state area. I wasn't the kind of CEO who sat in a climate-controlled office barking orders through a speakerphone. I was in the trenches. I spent my days in the mud, my lungs filled with the scent of diesel fuel and the alkaline bite of wet concrete. I built hospitals where children were born, and old men like me drew their last breaths. I built schools where the floorboards still echo with the sound of feet running toward a future. I knew the value of $1 because I had bled for every single one of them, losing bits of my hearing to the roar of machinery, and the skin of my palms to the grit of the trade. But sitting there, tucked into the far corner of my son's meticulously manicured backyard, holding a glass of lukewarm water that tasted of plastic, I didn't feel like a builder. I felt like a building that had already been condemned. I felt the no trespassing signs being nailed into my chest. It was late July, the kind of heat that doesn't just sit on you, it crushes you. It felt like a wet wool blanket wrapped tight around my throat, making every breath a conscious effort. The air shimmered with a sickly, oily haze above the grass. The lawn was cut so perfectly with such surgical precision that it looked fake, a carpet of plastic meant to hide the dirt beneath. It was my grandson Leo's 7th birthday. My son David and his wife Emily had spared no expense. They never did. Why would they? The money they spent was rarely their own. I took a long, slow sip of my water. It tasted like copper, an old regret. I scanned the yard, trying to find a single thing that felt honest. It looked like a spread from a high-end architectural magazine. Cold, distant, and curated. There was a hired magician in a tuxedo that cost more than my first 3 trucks combined. Twisting balloons into grotesque, complicated shapes. Tigers with multicolored stripes. Giraffes with elongated necks. Each one was a fleeting, fragile toy that would pop before the sun went down. Near the infinity pool, a string quartet was stationed under a silk canopy. They weren't playing Mozart or Bach. They were scraping out pop hits from the radio, the violins screeching through synthesized melodies that felt hollow in the open air. Waiters in stiff white coats moved like ghosts through the crowd, passing silver trays laden with chilled shrimp and lobster tails that were slowly wilting in the oppressive humidity. And then there were the guests. David had invited everyone who mattered, which, in his world, meant people who could do something for him. There were the senior partners from his law firm, men with tans that came from a bottle and teeth that were blindingly white. Their handshakes were practiced, performed, with a limpness that reminded me of wet fish. Emily's friends were there, too, women who clutched their wine glasses like defensive weapons, their eyes constantly scanning the yard for social flaws. They looked at me sitting in my shade, with a mixture of pity and annoyance. I was a blemish on the aesthetic. My gray suit was off the rack, slightly tight around the middle, and my shoes were sensible, thick-soled things designed for support, not style. I sat in a white wicker chair that groaned under my weight. It felt far too fragile for a man of my frame. I was never a small man. I was built like the structures I used to raise, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, and heavy-set. My hands were the real giveaway. They were thick, calloused, and scarred from decades of misadventures with hammers and rebar. Emily hated my hands. She told me once, through a forced smile, that they looked unrefined. She had even suggested I wear linen gloves to the party to keep the sun off them. I didn't wear the gloves. She only saw the scars, the rough texture of a life lived in the elements. She never saw the strength that had built the very walls she slept within. She didn't realize that these rough hands were the reason she didn't have to work a day in her life. "Dad, there you are. I thought you'd retreated to the shadows for good." I looked up as David approached. He was wearing a cream-colored linen suit that draped perfectly over his frame. It had cost $3,000. I knew because I'd seen the bill on the credit card I had co-signed when his cash flow hit a snag last month. He held a glass of 20-year-old scotch, the ice clinking against the crystal with a hollow, expensive sound. To anyone else, he looked like the pinnacle of success. He looked like the man I had hoped he would become when I was working double shifts to pay for his private tutors. But I knew the blueprints of my son. I knew the structural flaws he thought he'd plastered over. I knew about the second mortgage he'd taken out on this house. The house I had essentially bought for him as a starter home that he'd turned into a palace of debt. I knew about the gambling accounts hidden behind shell companies, the digital paper trail of a man trying to outrun his own shadow. I knew his partnership at the law firm was built on sand. He spent more time networking at country clubs than he did in the law library. He was all facade, no load-bearing walls. "I'm not hiding, David," I said, my voice sounding raspy and old even to my own ears. "Just staying out of the sun. It's a young crowd, and I'm just trying to stay out of the way of the waiters." David didn't look at me when I spoke. His eyes were constantly moving, scanning the yard for the managing partner of his firm, or perhaps someone even more influential. "Nonsense," he said, his voice light and performative. "You just need to mingle. Get out there. Talk to people." He leaned in closer, and his tone shifted. It became tighter, more controlled. "And maybe, just for today, don't tell that story about the concrete mixer or the one about the foreman with the glass eye. It's a bit gritty for this group, don't you think?" I stiffened in the wicker chair, the wood creaking in protest. "It's a story about hard work, Dave, about how we finished the Miller Hospital 3 weeks ahead of schedule, because we didn't quit when the equipment broke." I know, David said, adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he'd had since he was a boy, caught in a lie. "Just keep it light. Everyone's here to have a good time, not a history lesson on masonry." He looked at me then, but he didn't see me. He saw a liability. "Oh," he added, as if it were an afterthought. "Emily wanted me to remind you, don't feed Leo any of that hard candy you usually carry. She's worried about his dental work." "I didn't bring any candy," I said flatly. I reached into my chest pocket and felt the stiff edge of the paper there. "I brought him a savings bond. It matures when he's 18. It'll cover a good chunk of his college tuition if the rates hold." David's smile didn't just falter, it vanished for a fraction of a second, before being replaced by a mask of polite gratitude. A savings bond wasn't flashy. It couldn't be photographed for social media. It wasn't a jet ski or a pony. It was practical, and David had spent his entire adult life running away from the practical. "That's great, Dad." "Really? Thanks." He patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt more like he was checking the quality of my suit fabric than offering affection. "I have to go catch the managing partner before he leaves. Grab some shrimp, okay? It's imported." He walked away without looking back, his linen suit glowing white in the sun, leaving me alone with my glass of warm water and the slow, steady realization that the house I had built for my family was beginning to groan under a weight it was never designed to carry. I sat there for another hour as the sun began its slow, agonizing descent. The shadows of the oak trees stretched across the lawn like long skeletal fingers reaching for the house. I felt like a ghost at my own grandson's feast, invisible to the living, yet tethered to the ground by a heavy chain of memory. I watched Leo. He was the only real thing in this entire artificial paradise. He was running through the sprinklers near the pool, his laughter the only sound that didn't feel rehearsed. He had my eyes, a deep, observant gray, and the same stubborn cowlick I used to fight in the mirror 50 years ago. When he thought his mother wasn't looking, he snuck away from the magician, who was busy struggling with a balloon rhinoceros, and sprinted toward my corner of the yard. He slid into the grass beside my chair, his breathing heavy, his face flushed with the kind of pure joy you can only find at 7. "Grandpa?" he whispered, leaning in, as if we were conspirators in a great heist. "Hey, sport," I said, a genuine smile finally breaking through the crust of my exhaustion. "Happy birthday. 7 is a big number. That's a load-bearing age." He giggled, though he didn't understand the metaphor. "Did you bring the coin?" "The special one?" I winked. This was our ritual. My father, a man who built stone walls in the rain, had taught me I had taught David, back when David still looked at me with wonder, instead of calculation. Now it was Leo's turn. "Well, let's see," I murmured. I reached out, my thick, scarred fingers moving with a surprising, practiced grace. I made a slow pass behind his right ear, and with a flick of my wrist a heavy silver dollar appeared between my thumb and forefinger. It glinted in the dying sunlight. Leo's eyes went wide, reflecting the silver. "How did you do that?" "The balloon guy uses pumps." "But you just found it. Magic, Leo," I said softly, pressing the cool metal into his small palm. "Real magic. It's about knowing where to look when everyone else is distracted by the noise." "Leo?" The voice cut through the air like a steel cable snapping under tension. Emily was marching toward us across the patio stones, the sharp click-clack of her designer heels sounding like a countdown. Her face was a mask of high-definition perfection, but her eyes were cold, darting toward me with a flash of irritation. "Come here, honey. The photographer is ready for the family portraits, near the gazebo. We need you right now." She didn't look at me. She didn't acknowledge my existence. She reached down, grabbed Leo's hand with a grip that looked far too tight, and pulled him away. Leo looked back at me over his shoulder, his small face falling into a shrug of helpless apology. The silver dollar was tucked tight in his fist. I was alone again, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the feeling of being a structural defect in their perfect light. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, staining the sky a bruised purple. The string quartet packed away their instruments, and a heavy, expectant silence fell over the yard. It was time for the main event, the ritual of the cake. 2 waiters, looking like mourners in their white jackets, wheeled out a massive mahogany cart. On it sat a cake that was less a dessert and more an obscenity. It was 4 tiers high, encrusted in edible gold leaf, and draped in delicate webs of spun sugar. It looked like a monument to vanity, a gilded tower built on a foundation of air. "Gather round, everyone. Gather round," Emily chirped, her voice amplified by the sudden stillness of the evening. She held a silver cake knife that glinted like a scalpel in the outdoor lighting. "She looks beautiful." I had to admit that, but it was the beauty of a jagged piece of glass. Sharp, dangerous, and purely decorative. The guests crowded around the table, a sea of linen and silk, their faces illuminated by the amber glow of the garden lights. I pushed myself up from the wicker chair. My knees popped, a sound like dry wood snapping, and a dull ache radiated from my lower back. I didn't want the front row. I didn't need to be in the photos. I just wanted to stand at the edge of the circle and see Leo's face when he blew out those 7 small flames. They sang happy birthday, 50 voices, most of them out of tune and disinterested, rising into the humid air. Leo huffed and puffed, his cheeks bulging, and blew out the candles in one determined go. The crowd erupted into polite, rhythmic clapping. "Cake time," Emily announced, her smile dazzling and hollow. She began to slice. She was methodical, her movements precise and surgical. The first massive slab, topped with a gold leaf chocolate curl, went to David's managing partner. The next went to the president of the local homeowners association, a man David had been courting for months to get a variance on his driveway. Then came the children, then Emily's inner circle of friends. She worked through the crowd with practiced efficiency. "Enjoy. It's Belgian chocolate with a hazelnut ganache." Simply divine. I waited. I stood at the back of the line, my hands clasped in front of me. I like chocolate cake, kid. It was a simple weakness I'd shared with my late wife, Sarah. Every year on my birthday, Sarah used to bake a simple yellow sheet cake with chocolate frosting. We'd eat it warm, straight from the oven, sitting at our scarred wooden kitchen table. It wasn't gold-leafed. It wasn't Belgian. but it was filled with something this yard lacked: substance. The crowd thinned as people drifted away to find tables and napkins. Finally, it was just me and a few stragglers near the mahogany cart. There was plenty of cake left, at least half of the bottom 2 tiers. Emily looked at me. She didn't offer a plate. She didn't smile. She slowly wiped the silver knife on a silk napkin, her eyes tracking me with a look of bored disdain. "Oh, Arthur," she said. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It was loud, targeted. It carried over the murmur of the nearby conversations, cutting through the ambient noise like a siren. "I didn't cut a piece for you." I blinked, momentarily confused by the sheer bluntness of it. "That's all right, Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can cut a small slice for myself if you're tired." "I don't want to be a bother." "No," she said. She stepped directly in front of the cake, shielding it with her body as if I were a looter. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the swell of my stomach beneath my off-the-rack suit. "I mean, look at you, Arthur," she said, a cruel, mocking lilt entering her voice. She gestured toward me with the silver knife, the blade catching the light. "You're already fat enough as it is." Honestly, the conversation at the nearest table stopped instantly. The silence was absolute, the kind of silence that precedes a building's collapse. "Your suit is literally straining at the buttons," she continued, her voice rising in mock concern. "I'm doing you a favor. Really, at your age, your heart probably can't take the cholesterol. We wouldn't want you having an episode on the lawn, would we? It would ruin the evening." I stood there, frozen. I felt the blood rush to my face, a searing heat that burned my cheeks and made my ears ring. It wasn't the insult about my weight. I was a big man, and I knew it had carried that weight for years. It was the public execution of my dignity. She had stripped me naked in front of 50 strangers, using my own body as a punchline to assert her dominance. I looked past her. I looked for myself. David was standing 5 feet away, a plate of cake in one hand and a fresh scotch in the other. This was the boy I had taught to fish. This was the man whose law school tuition I had paid for in cash, working overtime in the freezing rain to ensure he never had a student loan. "David," I said softly. It was a plea, a search for a load-bearing wall in a collapsing room. David looked at Emily. He saw the sharp, predatory challenge in her eyes. Then he looked at the guests, who were all watching with bated breath, waiting to see who held the power in this family. He looked at me, his father, standing there with empty, calloused hands. And then David chuckled. It wasn't a hearty laugh. It was a weak, pathetic sound. The sound of a man choosing a lie over the truth. "She's got a point, Dad," David said, his voice loud and jovial, desperately trying to frame the cruelty as a roast. "You are getting pretty heavy. Maybe you should stick to the celery sticks over by the dip. We want you around for a few more years, right? For Leo's sake?" He laughed again, louder this time, looking around the yard for approval. Because the host laughed, the guests felt permitted to join in. A ripple of nervous, cruel amusement moved through the crowd. They weren't laughing with him, they were laughing at the fat old man who just wanted a piece of cake. I swallowed hard. The air felt thin. In that moment, the foundation of my life didn't just crack. It shattered. The love I had carried for my son, a love that had survived his arrogance and his poor choices, died in the grass of that backyard. It didn't fade. It was extinguished. I looked at Leo. He was standing near the pool, holding his plate. He wasn't laughing. He looked terrified. He looked at me, and then he looked at his father, and I saw the first seeds of doubt being planted in his young mind. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table. I was a builder. When a structure is beyond repair, you don't scream at the bricks. You prepare for the demolition. I looked Emily dead in the eye and offered a small, cold smile. "You're right," I said, my voice as hard as cured concrete. "Health is everything, especially when things are about to get very, very stressful." I turned around. I walked through the crowd, and for the first time that day, people moved out of my way. They avoided my eyes. I walked out the side gate, the sound of David's hollow laughter echoing behind me like the ghost of a house that no longer existed. I got into my truck, the engine turning over with a familiar, heavy rumble that felt more honest than any word David had spoken in a decade. I didn't go home to my modest ranch. I didn't go to the cemetery to tell Sarah what our boy had become. I went to my office. The headquarters of Arthur Sterling Construction sat in a brick building on the edge of the industrial district. It wasn't a skyscraper. It was a low, sturdy structure I built with my own hands 30 years ago. Inside, the air was still and cool, smelling of old blueprint cedar pencils and the faint metallic tang of dust. In the dark, the silhouettes of my drafting tables looked like skeletal remains. I sat at my heavy oak desk, a piece of furniture that had seen more honest deals than David's entire law firm. I didn't turn on the overhead lights, I only clicked on the small brass desk lamp. The pool of amber light felt like a sanctuary. I unlocked the bottom drawer. It was a heavy steel file cabinet, fireproof and reinforced. I pulled out a thick accordion folder marked simply David. I had started this file the day he was born. It was supposed to be a record of his growth, then a record of his successes, and finally a roadmap for his inheritance. I had never truly opened it, not with the eyes of a builder looking for dry rot. I had always looked at it through the haze of a father's hope. But hope is a poor insulator. I turned on my computer. The blue light of the monitor made the scars on my hands look like deep purple trenches. I stopped being a father. I became an auditor. I began to cross-reference the mortgage payments I had been subsidizing with the bank accounts I had co-signed for. I spent the next 4 hours digging through the digital sediment of their lives. What I found didn't just make me angry. It made me physically ill. I felt a cold, oily sweat break out on my forehead. It wasn't just bad management or lifestyle creep. It was systematic theft. I found the account I had set up specifically for Leo, a medical and educational trust to ensure the boy was covered no matter what happened to me. I found the withdrawals, $5,000 on a Tuesday, $12,000 on a Friday. The destination? A series of offshore gambling portals and consulting firms that had no physical address, no employees, and no purpose other than to launder the future of my grandson. They were strip mining their own son's security to pay for gold-leafed cakes and linen suits. My hands were shaking, but my mind was sharpening. I guessed David's personal email password on the third try. Password 1-1203. Arrogance always makes a man sloppy. It makes him believe he is too clever to be caught, so he ignores the basic structural supports of his own lies. I logged in. I began to read. I found a thread between David and Emily from just 48 hours ago. The subject line was a knife to the throat. The old man. From Emily. We need to get him to sign the release on the trust fund. David, we're drowning. Thorne's people called again today. They weren't polite. If he doesn't sign it next week, we lose the cars. Maybe the house. You need to handle him. I read David's reply, and I felt the last lingering warmth in my heart turn to ash. From David, I'm working on it. He's getting old. He's getting senile. I talked to Dr. Evans this morning. If we can document a few more episodes, confusion, outbursts, memory loss, we can move for a guardianship. We take control of the estate now. We don't wait for him to die. It's for his own safety, really. I stared at the screen until the words blurred into meaningless black lines. Dr. Evans, my cardiologist. A man I had trusted for 15 years. A man David had clearly retained for a different kind of service. The party, the insults, Emily's public degradation of my weight and my mind. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a setup. They wanted me to yell. They wanted me to throw a chair or forget a name. They were building a case to lock me away in some high-end warehouse for the elderly so they could liquidate my life's work to pay off their debts. I printed the email. The printer groaned in the corner, the sound like a rhythmic heartbeat in the silent office. I printed the bank statements. I printed the wire transfers. I sat there as the clock on the wall ticked toward 5,000. The sun began to bleed over the horizon, casting long, pale shadows across the floor. I felt a strange, terrifying sense of calm. The confusion of the backyard was gone. The hurt was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was secondary to the mission. I knew exactly what I had to do. You don't patch a foundation this far gone. You level the site. I picked up the desk phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. Martha? I'd on the line picked up. Martha had been my head bookkeeper for nearly 4 decades. She was 70. sharp as a shard of flint, and possessed a memory like a steel trap. She was the only person who knew where every single bolt was buried in this company. Arthur? Her voice was groggy, then instantly alert. It's 5 in the morning. Are you in a ditch? No, Martha, but someone is. I need a favor. A big one. I need you to trace a series of shell companies I just found in David's records. And I need to know exactly who holds the private paper on his personal debts. Not the bank debt, the other kind. Is he in trouble, Arthur? He's past trouble, Martha. He's a collapse in progress. I need the numbers by 8:00 a.m. I hung up and stared out the window. The world was waking up, people heading to work, building things, fixing things. I felt like a man standing on a demolition site with his hand on the plunger. At 7:45 a.m., the fax machine in the corner hissed to life. Martha was always early. I grabbed the pages as they slid out. The report was devastating. David didn't just owe money, he owed it to the wrong people. The primary name on the debt wasn't a bank. It was Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a loan shark who masqueraded as a private equity investor. He didn't use lawyers to collect. He used men with heavy boots and no conscience. David owed Thorne $200, due in 48 hours. That explained the desperation. That explained why they were willing to drug me or declare me insane. They needed my money to save David's legs, or his life. I picked up the phone again. This time, I called my lawyer, Frank. Frank was a man who understood that sometimes justice isn't about the law. It's about the structure of the deal. Frank, I said, my voice sounding like gravel being crushed, I need you to prepare a sale document. Immediately. I'm selling the Sterling estate. Arthur, it's Monday morning. Sell to who? And why? That house is your son's home. It's my property, Frank. He's a tenant, and I've found a buyer who doesn't mind a quick casing. Also, I need you to contact the district attorney's office. I have a file I'm sending over via courier. It involves wire fraud, elder abuse, and the theft of a minor's trust fund. Arthur, are you sure? This is your son. There's no coming back from this. I looked at the scarred skin of my hands. I thought of the silver dollar in Leo's hand. I thought of the senile plot. The building is condemned, Frank, I said. Clear the site. Monday morning arrived with a sky, the color of cold slate. I was sitting in my kitchen, a space that felt honest in a way David's house never could. My home was a modest ranch, built with sturdy Douglas fir and a foundation that went 6 feet deep into the clay. It smelled of black coffee and the faint lingering scent of the lavender soap Sarah used to love. The silence was heavy like the air in a room before a controlled blast. I sat at the small linoleum table, my hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. The heat from the coffee seeped into my joints, but it couldn't touch the chill in my marrow. At exactly 9 a.m., the phone on the counter began to vibrate. It skittered across the surface like a panicked insect. I didn't rush to answer it. I watched it. I listened to the rhythmic hum, counting the seconds. I let it ring 3 times. On the 4th, I picked up. Hello, I said. My voice was a low rumble, steady and unyielding. Hey, Dad. David's voice boomed through the receiver. He sounded bright, cheery, and offensively vibrant. It was his closing the deal voice. He sounded as if the Saturday afternoon humiliation had never happened. As if he hadn't laughed while his wife called me a senile, fat old man. How are you feeling this morning? The sun was pretty brutal on Saturday. I was worried you might have a bit of heat stroke. I'm fine, David, I said, taking a slow sip of coffee. I could almost see him on the other end, pacing in his glass-walled office, straightening his silk tie, checking his reflection. Good, good. Listen, Dad, the reason I'm calling, it's just a bit of housekeeping. You know how it is at the end of the month. Cash flow gets a little tight with the firm's quarterly taxes. He cleared his throat, a sound of practiced vulnerability. The mortgage payment on the estate is due today. And well, with the party expenses and some unexpected investments, we're a little thin. If you could just defer this month's payment, or maybe just wire the bridge amount like you did in May. He paused, the silence filled with the static of his expectation. He was waiting for the ATM to dispense the usual grace. He was so confident in my weakness, so certain that my love for him was a structural flaw he could exploit forever. David, I said. Yeah, Dad, I have some news about the house. The Sterling estate. I heard a chair creak on his end. Oh? Did you finally decide to refinance it into our names? That would be a huge help, actually. Emily was saying just yesterday how much it would mean to us to officially own the family seat. I closed my eyes. I pictured the gold-leafed cake. I pictured Emily's sneer as she gestured at my stomach with a silver knife. I pictured the email where they discussed drugging me to steal my life's work. No, David, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I didn't refinance it. Then what? Did you pay it off? Dad, you shouldn't have, but God, that's incredible. I sold it. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. I could hear David's breathing hitch, a sharp, ragged sound. What? He laughed, but it was a brittle, jagged sound. You sold what? Your truck. The old cabin. No, I said, each word a brick being laid. The house, David, the Sterling estate. The deed, the land, and every stick of furniture inside it. I signed the papers at 7:30 this morning. The wire transfer hit my account 10 minutes ago. You can't do that, David stammered, his voice losing its polish, becoming high and thin. We live here. It's our home. Leo's toys are in the yard. You can't just sell a house while people are living in it. I can, I said, because legally you are a tenant. A tenant who is 6 months behind on rent payments that I've been covering. A tenant who has violated the morality clause of our private agreement. Morality clause? What are you talking about? Dad, you're confused. This is the exhaustion talking. You're having one of those moments David told me about. I saw the emails, David, I interrupted. The sound of his name seemed to deflate the air on the other end of the line. I saw the transfers to the offshore casinos. I saw the consulting fees paid to Marcus Thorne. And I saw the plan you and Emily hatched to have Dr. Evans declare me incompetent so you could raid the trust. There was a heavy thud on his end, like he'd dropped his phone or slumped into his expensive leather chair. Dad, wait, the new owners are a commercial holding group, I continued, my voice cold and clinical. They don't want the house. They want the land for a luxury development. They're coming over in an hour to do the initial walkthrough and site survey. I suggest you tell Emily to put some clothes on and start packing. You have 24 hours to vacate before the sheriff arrives with the eviction summary. You're killing us, David shrieked. Thorne will kill me. I owe him. I know exactly what you owe him, I said, and I know where you took the money from to pay your interest. You stole from Leo. You broke the one rule a builder has. You never compromise the integrity of the next generation. I hung up. I sat back in my chair. My heart wasn't racing. For the first time in years, the flutter my doctor worried about was gone. I felt solid. I felt like cured concrete, heavy, cold, and capable of holding an immense amount of pressure without cracking. But I knew it wasn't over. A man like David, backed into a corner, doesn't admit defeat. He doubles down on the lie. I didn't have to wait long. I knew their transit time from the estate to my ranch was exactly 38 minutes if they hit the lights. At the 40-minute mark, I heard the scream of tires on my graveled driveway. David's white SUV, the one I paid the insurance on, skidded to a halt. The doors flew open before the engine was even off. I didn't get up. I remained in my armchair in the living room, a book on my lap, the shadows of the porch eaves, shielding my face. I had unlocked the front door. I wanted them to come in. I wanted them to step into the space they thought they could steal. They burst in like a storm. Emily looked wild. Her hair, usually a lacquered helmet of perfection, was frayed and messy. Her eyes were manic, rimmed with a desperate, sharp red. David was pale. The color unmixed plaster. He was sweating profusely, his linen shirt clinging to his back in ugly dark patches. You spiteful, senile old man, Emily screamed, her voice cracking the peace of my living room. You can't sell that house. I'll sue you into the Stone Age. I'll have you committed by noon. We have the papers, Dad, David yelled, waving a blue legal folder in the air as if it were a weapon. His hand was shaking so hard the papers rattled. We have the affidavit from Dr. Evans. He signed it this morning. It says you're suffering from advanced cognitive decline. You weren't of sound when you signed that sale. The contract is void. I didn't flint. I slowly turned a page in my book. Incompetent. I asked softly. Is that the angle we're going with? Yes, Emily shouted, stepping toward me, her heels digging into my old rug. You don't know what you're doing. You're confused. You're a danger to yourself and this family. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out a small plastic bottle of pills. Her movements were jerky, frantic. We're taking you to the Oak Ridge facility today, Arthur. For your own good. David, give him this sedative. He's clearly agitated and delusional. David hesitated for a second, his eyes darting to the kitchen, then back to me. He grabbed a glass of water from my side table, his movements clumsy. Dad, just take the pill, David said, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of fear and resolve. It's for your blood pressure. It will help you calm down so we can fix this mess you've made. You want to drug me, David? I asked, looking him directly in the eye. In my own home? To protect a house you didn't earn, and a life you've already gambled away. I have to protect my family, David cried, his voice breaking into a sob. I am your family, I roared. The sound of my own voice, a builder's roar that had once commanded crane operators in high winds, shook the pictures on the walls. I stood up, my large frame dwarfing them both. The sudden movement made David jump back, the glass of water slipping from his hand and shattering on the floor. The pill bounced once, twice, and rolled into the shadows beneath the radiator. You were my family, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt more dangerous than the shout. Now you're just a case number. What are you talking about? Emily asked, her voice faltering as she looked around the room, finally noticing the stillness. What case number? Now, I shouted. The door to my kitchen, which had been pulled nearly shut, flew open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped out, their faces grim, their hands hovering near their belts. Behind them stepped Detective Miller, a man I had known for 20 years, a man who knew exactly how much hard work looked like, because I'd built his father's house and his own summer deck. David and Emily Sterling, Miller said, his voice flat and professional. Put your hands behind your backs. Now. No, Emily screamed, backing away toward the window. This is a trap. He's crazy. He's trying to kidnap us. We've been in the kitchen for 20 minutes, Mrs. Sterling, Miller said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. We heard the entire conversation. We heard the threats. We saw the medication you tried to force on him, and we've already spent the morning reviewing the wire transfers from your son's trust fund. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, Miller continued, clicking the first cuff onto David's wrist. Attempted poisoning and 34 counts of wire fraud. David didn't. He fell to his knees in the middle of my living room, the broken glass of the water bottle glittering around him like fallen diamonds. He looked up at me, tears finally streaming down his face, his success mask completely shattered. Dad, why? He whimpered. Why would you do this to me? I looked down at him, and for a fleeting second, I saw the 5-year-old boy who used to hold my thumb when we crossed the street. But then I saw the man who laughed while I was humiliated. I saw the man who tried to erase my mind to save his own skin. Because you broke the foundation, David, I said. And when the foundation is broken, there is only one thing left to do. The house has to come down. The sound of the handcuffs clicking was a finality I felt in my own bone. It was the sound of a structural failure, the high-pitched snap of a steel bolt before the whole bridge gives way. Emily didn't go quietly. She was a creature of optics until the very end, screaming about lawsuits, about her status, about how the police were ruining her vibrant life. Her voice echoed off the walls of my modest home, sounding tinny and hollow. David, however, was a different story. He stayed on his knees, his head bowed, his expensive linen suit stained with the water from the glass he'd dropped. He looked like a building that had already collapsed inward, leaving only a shell of dust and broken glass. Take them out, Detective Miller said quietly. As they were led to the patrol cars, David looked back at me one last time. His eyes weren't filled with anger. They were filled with a pathetic, desperate confusion, as if he still couldn't understand why the father he had tried to destroy wouldn't save him one last time. The door closed, and the silence that rushed back into the house was deafening. It was a heavy, pressurized silence. I sat back down in my chair, my legs shaking with a delayed adrenaline. I looked at the floor, the tiny white pill of betrayal sitting near the radiator. It was a small thing, A fraction of a gram, yet it carried enough weight to crush a 40-year legacy. I didn't cry. My tear ducts felt like dry wells parched by years of seeing the truth and refusing to speak it. I just sat there and watched the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight, thinking getting the day I built David's first treehouse. I remember the care I took with the joists, ensuring they were over-engineered so my boy would be safe, 10 feet off the ground. I had spent my life building things to protect him, never realizing I was building a fortress for a monster. The legal battle that followed was short and brutal. There is no defense against a digital paper trail and a recorded confession of intent. Martha, bless her iron soul, stayed at my office for 72 hours straight, tracing the labyrinthine paths of David's debt. She found the leverage Marcus Thorne held over him, not just the $200,000, but the photos of David at illegal gambling dens, things that would have ended his legal career in a heartbeat. The district attorney, seeing the mounting evidence of elder abuse and the systematic draining of Leo's trust, didn't offer a gentleman's deal. David pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy. He got 5 years in a federal facility. Emily, arrogant to the end, tried to fight it. She claimed she was a victim of David's mania. The jury didn't buy the ferment. She got 7. I spent those months in a state of clinical precision. I sold the Sterling estate to the developers. I watched from my truck as the demolition crew arrived. They didn't use a wrecking ball. They used excavators. I watched the gold-leafed moldings and the Italian tile being crushed into a gray, undifferentiated powder. I sold the furniture, the chandeliers, and even the ridiculous balloon animal pond. Every cent of the profit was funneled back into Leo's trust fund, fortified now by a legal structure that no one, not even me, could touch without 3 layers of judicial oversight. Then came the hardest part of the build. Leo. He came to live with me 2 weeks after the arrests. Child Protective Services had been involved, but with my clean record and the trust fund restored, the transition was swift. It was a quiet house at first. Too quiet. Leo moved through the rooms like a small, wounded animal. He didn't understand why his parents were gone. He didn't understand why the big house was a parking lot. He cried at night, not loud, jagged sobs, but a low, rhythmic whimpering that broke my heart more than any insult Emily had ever hurled. I would sit by his bed, my large, scarred hands resting on the edge of the mattress. I told him stories. Not fairy tales, but stories of the buildings I'd raised. I told him about the steel skeletons of skyscrapers that could sway 3 feet in a hurricane without snapping. I told him about the concrete deep in the earth that held everything up, even when the world above was on fire. "Grandpa," he asked one evening, about 6 months into our new life. We were in the kitchen. It was his half-birthday, a small milestone we'd decided to celebrate. "Yes, sport. Can we have cake? A real one?" I froze. The memory of the party, the laughter, the silver knife, the public shaming hit me like a physical blow. I felt the phantom heat in my cheeks. I almost said no. I almost told him we'd have ice cream instead. But then I looked at his face. He wasn't them. He wasn't the facade or the gold leaf. He was the foundation I had left. "Okay," I said, my voice thick. "Let's bake one. From scratch." We made a mess. It was glorious. There was flour on the ceiling and chocolate batter on our noses. We didn't make a 4-tier monument to vanity. We made a simple, round yellow cake with thick chocolate frosting, baked in a pan that Sarah had used for 40 years. It was lopsided and smelled like heaven. We sat at the linoleum table. I cut a massive, steaming slice for Leo. Then I cut an equally large one for myself. Leo's fork hovered over the plate. He looked at me, his eyes wide and serious. "Grandpa, Mom said cake makes you fat. She said it makes you ugly." I looked at the cake. I looked at the scars on my hand. I looked at the boy who was finally starting to stand up straight again. "Leo," I said, "your mom was wrong about a lot of things. Mostly, she was wrong about what makes a person beautiful. Cake doesn't make you fat. It makes you happy. And after the year we've had, we deserve to be happy." I took a massive bite. It was sweet, warm, and tasted like victory. Leo followed suit, a grin finally breaking through his caution, his face smeared with chocolate. "Eat up," I said. "We have a lot of growing to do, a lot of building." 1 week later, A letter arrived from the correctional facility. It was from David. I could tell by the precise, expensive penmanship on the envelope, a style he'd practiced to look like a partner. I didn't open it. I walked it up to the attic and placed it in a cedar box. Maybe one day, when Leo is a man, and his own foundation is set in stone, he'll want to read the words of the man who almost broke him. But not today. Today, the sun was shining. It wasn't the oppressive, oily heat of the party. It was a clean, crisp autumn warmth. I walked out to the truck. Leo was already buckled in, his tackle box sitting on his lap. "Ready, Grandpa?" "Ready, Leo." I gripped the steering wheel. Emily had been right about one thing. My hands were ugly. They were rough, scarred, and the knuckles were swollen with arthritis. They were the hands of a man who had spent his life in the mud and the grit. But as I started the engine and looked at my grandson, I knew the truth. They were strong hands. They had built skyscrapers. They had dismantled a house of lies, and now, one day at a time, they were building a life that would actually hold its weight. We drove toward the lake, leaving the ash behind. I realized then that wealth isn't the gold leaf on the cake. It isn't the $3,000 suit or the important handshakes. Wealth is the peace of knowing the ground beneath you won't give way. I had lost a son, but I had saved a grandson, and in the world of construction, that's what we call a successful renovation. The foundation was finally solid. Thanks for walking this journey with us all the way. With Arthur and David in mind, was this ending how it should have happened? Or did David deserve a second chance?